Good morning, Professor Nalapat. Good morning to my colleagues, research scholars, and dear students. After long 2 years of social isolation due to the pandemic, we are getting back to the normal situation, normal classes, no presentations, seminars, conferences, and other programs. So we have to take precaution. That I hope everyone is doing. The social distance and everything is continuing, and world is also struggling get back to the normalcy. And in this context, we can find that new troubles are also appearing in the form of crisis. I don't want to call it as a war. Yet it is not a war, but a conflict situation is appeared in the Europe, especially in the Eastern European side. So this was a request from a few of the students of the second year MA batch. They came to me and asked whether we can do a program, and I felt this is the right time because today is the 1 month mark we are closing of the conflict. So it is best time to take a stock of what all happened and how it was appeared. As part of Geopolitics and International Studies department, it is our responsibility to develop, analyze, and understand the details of the conflict. And they have taken a good step, and we are supporting them in this regard. We have arranged this program in a seminar format, which will have 4 sessions, and each session will have a chair and a discussant, maybe 1 or 2 discussants who are working on that area. So they will be finding the problems or addings and all those things on the presenting paper and help you to make it better in the after the presentation. And we offered that if good papers are appearing, then we will push it for publications also. So this is an opportunity for all of you, and I'm sure many of you, especially the second year batch, where they don't have an opportunity to be in the regular class for a long time. They started, but then after the pandemic appeared, then they left. Then they appeared again. Pandemic appeared. Then they went back. Then now we hope it is all over, and we are coming back to regularity. And all of you are engaged in the dissertation work. But in between, you took time to organize this program, and that makes us very proud. So the program is made into 4 sessions. First one is on geopolitics, security, and foreign policy aspects. And 5 or 6 people are presenting papers on that aspect. And second session is on international perspectives, global responses. How the countries are responding to the crisis, what is the international perspective on the crisis. This is what is dealing in the second session. Third is very important one, role of media, how media is watching, how media is interpreting the crisis, and how they are playing their positions. And 3 or 4 papers are appeared in this section. And 4th session is about gender, environment, and other non-traditional security aspects. So I hope by these 4 sections, we can cover the entire crisis in a holistic manner. So today's specialty is to make an introduction to the entire program. We have Professor Nalapat with us, our mentor, our Honorary Director, and the most important support for us. And I welcome you, sir, for this program.
Thank you, Ravi. Thank you. With your permission, I'll start now.
Yes, we can start, sir. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Ravi, and I'm delighted to address our students. Truly delighted. I wish I could be there in person, But I must confess that apart from the pandemic, etc., I mean, in my case, I used to travel maybe twice a week. Once the pandemic started, I hardly traveled at all. And now, frankly, I've begun to understand that a lot of time is saved by not traveling long hours in flights for the sake of essentially 6 or 8 hours of substantive meetings, that most of those meetings could take place virtually, not all of them. So I must confess that I've cut back my travels quite a bit. I'm using the pandemic as an excuse, as so many other people use this pandemic as an excuse for various other things. But I really do want to come to Manipal, and I think I'll get a window of opportunity for that to come for a sufficiently long period, somewhere in the month of April. I truly look forward to that. And I really am very happy to meet our students once again. And each of them, I'm sure, is going to make much more significant contributions to the field of study that we are in than any of us have. But having said that, let me come on to this particular subject that Ravi has requested me to begin. I'm sure all of you have heard about something called net assessment. If I may say so, the real guru of net assessment, and I regard him as my personal guru as well during the 90s, definitely, was Andrew Marshall. Andy Marshall, for a long time, was in the Pentagon. I don't think he had any title. I don't think he had any defined responsibility. His only job was to think and think and think and think. Think on the basis of net assessment, which essentially means you work out different outcomes. Those that are very likely, those that are less likely, but feasible. These outcomes should be feasible. They cannot be outcomes that are feasible only in a movie or a comic book. They have to be, or a fixed work of fiction. They have to be realizable given prevailing at the time. So you go through options, and then you go through the different paths towards each option. And if you find a pairing of a path which may be suitable for X country or Y country, and you have an outcome that is also maybe quite suitable for X country or Y country, then I think it will be justified in saying that most likely that is the outcome that they may choose. And in any case, if that country is a hostile country, it's very important for the country doing the net assessment to ensure that adequate preparation is made for any hostile conduct on the part of that country. This is, I mean, in a nutshell, it is my understanding of net assessment. And I've been privileged to actually, discuss matters with Andy Marshall in the same room, and it's a tremendous privilege and honor, and I still remember those days with great gratitude. Let me now go on to the subject of this particular invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February by forces of the Russian Federation. Now, let me explain some of the background to this conflict and why President Putin regarded it as advisable that he go into a kinetic mode of operation in Ukraine. I've heard very responsible statespersons, I've heard, including to me, on reasonably secure conversation methods, describe him as a little unhinged and other things. I don't know if they're just giving me a line for me to believe that they believe, or they really believe that, because they really believe that, then their countries are in trouble. I mean, you had President Biden describe him as a killer. You had the British Defense Secretary, I think, describe him in Parliament as quote unquote full tonto. If you look at what that means, it's not a very complimentary thing to say. And these are among the most complimentary things that are being said about President Putin by his adversaries in NATO. Well, one of the first lessons that you need to learn is never to overestimate or underestimate your adversary. It's a fine balance, but it's very important to get that balance right, because overestimation is dangerous, but even more dangerous can be underestimation. So, I mean, whether this is actually believed, but judging by what has been happening in Ukraine, especially since 2014, I'm inclined to believe that that our good friends in NATO, and France is a very good friend of India. United States is an extremely good friend of India. About the UK, I don't know. It's a good friend of nobody. But you know, these are countries that are good friends of India. Germany is definitely close to India. I don't think that will change under Chancellor Scholz. If anything, it will improve. But it's a bit disconcerting to see what has happened in Ukraine. And you have also a media narrative that, in my view, the media narrative does not diverge at all from the approved media narrative, let's say in China or in Russia or countries like that. There's no difference between the UK press and the Chinese press. No difference at all. The Russian press is a little more liberal than the UK press, definitely much more liberal than the American press. It's a completely monochromatic view of the world. And you have people like Tulsi Gabbard and Tucker Carlson who are piping up and saying, maybe you're wrong. And they're immediately slapped down as traitors. That's a very dangerous word to use. I mean, I've always been opposed to the use of the word traitor, because what happens is you keep shouting out traitor, traitor. Then when a real traitor appears in your midst, no one's going to believe you. And you need public support to deal with the very few traitors that you have in a country, not the multitudes of traitors that it is regarded as expedient to call traitors in a fashion dangerous to security. Look, I'd like you to study your geography maps a little more carefully, because, yeah, I mean, it might be said that, you know, virtual space, cyberspace is the modern space of warfare. Well, we don't live in cyberspace. We are human beings. You're not exactly in cyberspace at the moment, and neither am I. I am sitting in physical space and addressing you through an insecure link. But you know, neither of us is in cyberspace. We are in physical space, which is where kinetic warfare becomes important. Control of physical space becomes important. And we have to understand why some of the physical spaces around Russia, including those that have been filled by the NATO alliance, which I don't think any of you will believe has been friendly to Russia. Mr. Putin tried very hard to join NATO as much as 4 times, publicly, I don't know privately how many times, and each time he was rebuffed. He finally gave up trying to join NATO and understood that NATO needed Russia as an enemy for its survival as a bureaucracy. So from that time on, he stopped trying to join NATO. It would have been a game changer if Russia had joined NATO. It would have been a game changer if Russia had joined the European Union, because Russia is half of Europe. Geographically, and again, as I said, please don't neglect physical space in your obsession with the virtual world and cyber world. It's physical space that we survive in. It's physical space that feeds us, that gives us employment, etc., etc. So half of Europe is Russia. So when you talk about the security of Europe, and you're saying that this security has got to be at the expense of the security of one half, if it is Russia saying that our security must be at the expense of the other half of Europe, or the other half of Europe saying our security can only be established if it's at the expense of the half that comprises the European segment of the Russian Federation. There's a huge Asian segment also that you know, which is why Russia is a Eurasian power. It's both Asian and European. It's not European, it's not Asian, it's Eurasian. But that's a different matter. I mean, I've never been able to understand how my friends, in the West really reconcile their insistence on European security and at the same time their conviction that this must involve trampling on the security of about half the land area of Europe. Now let's take the vulnerabilities of Russia, let's say to an invasion by NATO. And let's not forget, NATO, I mean, now it has sprung back publicly. It had some adventures in Libya. It had some adventures in Iraq, in Syria, in Afghanistan, in all these locations. Barring Libya, I've been to all these locations. I can tell you these adventures ended very badly for the people there and very badly for NATO, which, I mean, Afghanistan, you're seeing Afghanistan. And after what has happened in Afghanistan, and frankly, what we're seeing now in Ukraine, Ukraine has unfortunately taken the wrong turn and listened to the wrong people. And the Ukrainian people are paying a very, very horrible price for this. Look, I talk of war all the time. A doctor talks of illness all the time. It doesn't mean a doctor wants people to be ill. It doesn't mean a doctor wants illness, definitely not. I don't believe any doctor true to his oath would want illness. I would, knowing the horrors of war, in many cases firsthand, including internally, the covert war of Pakistan in the Punjab in the 1980s and in Kashmir in the 1990s, I know precisely, at least slightly, what war is. And I certainly don't want war. But having said that, one has to study how conflicts can develop so that one works out methods of avoiding conflict. And I'd like to say, I don't always support the stand of the government of India on many things. On this matter, on the issue of Ukraine, the government has got it exactly right. The policy of our country is exactly right. And there has been some overt and a lot more covert pressure on us to become, quote unquote, on the right side of history. Well, we have to decide on the right side of history in several locations. And if those who are saying that are saying that the Taliban was fought for 20 years to hand the country back to the Taliban, then definitely they have a somewhat different view of the right side of history than a few of us have. Again, so look, Poland is in a sense the funnel through which a sustained land invasion of Russia can take place. Stalin grabbed the large section of the eastern part of Poland, and Poland was given a large section of Germany post 1945 as compensation, very adequate compensation. But that may not be enough. Maybe a little more of Poland may be needed if you're looking at military planners, looking at net assessment, looking at an actual full-scale kinetic conflict with NATO, hopefully not involving nuclear weapons, but a full-scale kinetic conflict. It will be very important for Russia to take at least a fifth more territory from Poland. Maybe some other European countries would be happy to compensate Poland for that territory. But unfortunately, that is the situation now. Stalin did not take enough of Poland to take account of the modern military needs. Because we look at Poland, it has about 4, but essentially 2. And principally, very importantly, 1 passageway. Whoever controls that passageway essentially can dominate the land area and can invade either westwards or eastwards, depending on who controls Poland. So far as the Baltic states are concerned, it's an entirely different matter. Russia, frankly, has got them by the throat, but they seem to believe that NATO is a totem which will protect them. Poland also apparently believes that. Mr. Zelensky also apparently believes that, sometimes what happens is we have a good luck charm, for example. You wear a good luck charm and you believe that you won't die in battle. And whenever you come out of battle with that good luck charm, you give credit to that good luck charm, but there may be a few individuals who, despite their good luck charm, die in battle. So whether NATO is a totem or not, we may soon have the ability to test that particular premise. But certainly the Baltic countries believe that the joining NATO means immunity from any kind of kinetic attack by Russia. Certainly Ukraine believes that if it were a member of NATO, it would not be facing the horrible fate it is facing now. And I would like to say it's a terrible fate. It's a terrible fate, but believe me, it may not be as terrible a fate as was what people in Africa are going to face now as a consequence of these sanctions by NATO countries on Russia and their effect on disruptive supply chains. The ending of food shortages are coming because of the removal of Ukrainian and Russian grain, fertilizer because of the removal of Russian fertilizer especially. Brazil, for example, one of the important feed stocks of the world, it depends heavily on Russia for its fertilizers. And I think President Bolsonaro understands that. I don't believe he's going to stop buying fertilizer from Russia as friends in Europe and the United States and Canada want him to do. India certainly is not going to stop buying anything from Russia. It's very interesting that when I calculated it, it was a few $billion of oil that we bought from Russia. A few $billion. The Japanese, to my calculation, buy about $200 billion worth of oil from Russia. That's a little bigger than a few $1 billion, I think. The Germans buy even very much more than double that of the Japanese. But somehow the White House seems to be fixated on saying that India is out of step with history. India is somehow the bad boy in buying a measly few $1 billion from Russia, ignoring the fact that Japan is buying 200 billion and Germany is buying much more. So far as the Japanese are concerned, as you probably know, in Sakhalin 2, India, ONGC, Videsh, and 2 or 3 Japanese consortia. Look, in these days where you can search for almost anything, I'm not going to be, trying to go into the awesome detail that is presented in, in some papers, especially in footnotes. I'm sorry, I don't deal with notes. Maybe a sheet of paper in which I scroll some talking points, which I sometimes use and sometimes don't use. But having said that, those Japanese companies have assured ONGC Videsh, not obviously on CNN, that don't worry, we don't care what our government or officials tell us. We are sticking to our deal with Russia along with you on Sakhalin 2. I think Premier Kishida is a very intelligent man. He understands the situation in the Indo-Pacific very well. He understands the real threat to the globe very well, much better than some of his G7 partners do. And I don't think Premier Kishida will put too much of pressure, except some naam ke vaste pressure, which is exactly what other countries have been putting on India. Naam ke vaste, knowing very well India is not going to budge from a very principled stand that we have taken on the Ukraine conflict. So the Japanese companies are on board, and Japan is not Nazi Germany. It's not even fascist Japan. It is a modern, progressive, moderate, democratic country that any Japanese can be proud of. Of course, it's a very ancient civilization that again they can be proud of. And you cannot bully a company in Japan. As now in the case of companies in the United States, in the UK, in Europe, they bought into this fiction that it's only going to be a matter of days maybe a week or two at the most, before Putin folds up and understands the kind of heavy ammo that we have thrown at him in this financial war of annihilation against the Russian economy. Unfortunately, President Putin has demonstrated that he is, as Ravi correctly said, I think today is the first month of the war, and if it drags on for another month, I feel sorry for people in Asia, Africa, Latin America, Europe, and North America, because supply chains are going to be so disrupted, prices are going to be so high that it's going to be very difficult, especially for the lower middle class, lower classes to get by, and for the lowest classes, frankly, to survive. You are going to see a lot of deaths taking place as a consequence of these sanctions. And it's not, I'm not talking about deaths on the field, whether they're Russian or Ukrainian. Every death is to be commiserated. Every death is something that should have been avoided. But I'm talking about the deaths that take place as collateral damage in this, and in this amazing acceleration of sanctions against the preeminent nuclear power in the world, nuclear weapons power in the world, which is Russia. I happen to have some idea of 5th and 6th generation, and presently they're working even on 7th generation weapons in Russia. And I can tell you, this is not a country that will surrender. It's not a country that will surrender at all. I think they have held back on Ukraine to try and give Ukrainian civilians a chance to flee. But once it is clear that the Ukrainian civilians who are left behind cannot flee, I doubt that Mr. Putin is going to anymore, bear the tauntings that he's getting on media channels that, oh, it's bogged down, it's an incompetent army, it's an inefficient army. And believe me, I mean, you see the latest Sukhoi models, you see the S-500, even the early development stages, you see various other smart weapons that the Russians have got, including 2 or 3 of the missiles that they have fired into Ukraine as demonstrators. They need not have fired that in Ukraine. They are simply demonstrating to their enemies. And today, NATO and Russia, NATO is a declared enemy of Russia. When you say that you want to destroy the Russian economy and destroy the lives of Russian people, and then say that you love the Russian people, there's something a little contradictory about that. It's like the hangman saying, I love you, that's why I'm going to kill you. I doubt that the person who's being condemned will believe that, and I doubt that he's going to stop fighting to ensure that he survives. In the case of Russia, you have a first-class nuclear weapons power. Don't look at it from the economic point of view of dollars. Our economy is much bigger than it looks in dollar terms. And may I point out, I mean, I don't know if any of you gentlemen read, and ladies, I'm sorry, read the Sunday Guardian. The last week's cover story was by me and a financial analyst based in New York about how these sanctions are really going to have a horrible impact on the credibility of the US dollar, the euro, the Swiss franc, and the British pound. They're killing their own currencies with this currency war and unfortunately, it has given a boost to the currency war of the Sino-Russian alliance. But look, I want to say that. So as far as the Baltic states are concerned, they believe that joining NATO will ensure that Mr. Putin does not come there. Ukraine believed that being very, very pro-Western and essentially being anti-Russian would protect them from a Russian attack. That did not happen. NATO believed that they could deter. All these sanctions that you're seeing have been designed to deter Russia from a conflict that began on February 24, 2022. I mean, once your deterrence strategy failed ab initio, to continue with the sanctions, a policy that has failed ab initio, is like a doctor. Patients die on the hospital beds with the medicine. No, it's something wrong with this patient. I'll give to the next patient. I'll give to the next patient. I mean, if you had that kind of a doctor, I certainly hope that, in Manipal, if we had that kind of a doctor, that doctor would find himself out of Manipal and hopefully very soon out of the medical profession. But this is exactly what NATO is doing. I don't know who's doing net assessment in NATO. I used to go to the United States and Pentagon, and of course, I had the privilege of interacting with Andy Marshall a few times. But I mean, after the 1990s, really, I have not gone there, at least for the net assessment sessions, although I have met people involved in this kind of activity. But, and I must respect them as very good professionals. I'm really surprised that they've taken such a wrong turn. Look, Ukraine is absolutely critical to the physical security of Russia. If you want to attack Russia, you have to come in through Eastern, I mean, now no longer Eastern Poland, it's now Ukraine, by the way, that has taken over those Polish territories. You have to come in through Eastern Ukraine, a very small sliver of territory in Eastern Poland, which is still with Poland. Stalin, I think, was a little merciful, as he has been, or as he was on Berlin. But you have to do that. And Ukraine, if you can enter into Ukraine, if you can station your forces into Ukraine, if you can station bases into Ukraine, you are essentially delivering practically a knockout blow to Russian kinetic defenses. Because Ukraine is the perfect funnel through which you can carry out a land invasion of Russia. It's not from the Baltic states. It's not from anywhere in the, in the soft underbelly, that is the Central Asian or other republics. It's certainly not from the Chinese frontier. It's certainly not from Japan or South Korea. It's certainly not from any of from any of these locations. It's from Ukraine, which essentially means that if the individual, the country that controls Ukraine in a kinetic manner, and Belarusia, by the way, is similarly important. Through Belarusia, you can enter into the Russian Federation in a kinetic manner and tear it into pieces much easier than if you did not have control of Belarusia. And if you did not have control of Ukraine, it is almost impossible for a westward thrust into Russia. Belarus is now part of the friendly countries of Russia. There were attempts to create a revolution there, as in the Ukraine in 2015, where Mr. Yanukovych was removed. I don't believe Zelensky is a CIA agent. I don't believe Viktor Yanukovych was a KGB agent. Both are loyal Ukrainian patriots. Yanukovsky believed, in my view correctly, that a friendly Russia was essential to the stability of Ukraine, a country which had more than 30% of the population speak Russian. It was much more in the past. Many have migrated to Russia after 2015, and I'm sure all of you will inquire why and find out why. There's something that I don't see at all discussed in the European Union or in Britain or the United States or any of these countries for some reason. I think they just escaped their attention. As, for example, Afghanistan has escaped his attention. I keep in fairly close contact with Afghanistan. I have done that from the 1990s onwards. And the Taliban is going house to house in Afghanistan. And whenever they find somebody who had anything to do with the US military, even, for example, sending a few emails here and there, that individual, many of them are shot out of hand. This activity is going on while Afghanistan and the human situation there is being completely ignored. You've seen publicly how the Taliban has said, we don't want girls to study. Girls are not meant to study, books and other things. I mean, they're meant for other things, which frankly is an insult to humanity. I'm very happy, Ravi, that you have included gender justice in this. Because if there's no gender justice in the country, that country is not a civilized country. Any country which has got 10% gender injustice is 10% uncivilized. A country that has 95% gender injustice is 95% civilized and uncivilized. And that is the situation. This is the point. So I'm very happy that you have brought in gender justice as a very important segment of security, because whether it is gender justice, whether it is justice on the basis of religion, where you have genuine equality of treatment of all faiths, genuine secularism is absolutely essential to national security. Any othering of any religion in any country is a threat to the national security of the entire people of that country. This is something that I've repeated quite a lot of times, and I'm just repeating it to you here in case there are still some people on the planet who have not, who have access to my writing, but who have not heard this. So I'd like to point out why Ukraine is important from the kinetic point of view. The second point is why Ukraine is important from another point of view, which frankly, many of us don't really think about. In my own case, I leave almost all the temple going to my wife, Lakshmi, and I must say that, she does go to a lot of temples, and she makes up for the fact that I hardly go to temples at all. I am a Sanatani, just as she is, but I am really not a temple-going Sanatani. And I think many of us are in that same category. We're not church-goers. We're not even synagogue-goers. We're not masjid or praying 5 times a day, but we're still devout Muslims. We're still devout Christians. We are devout Jews, and we are devout Sanatanis. So, look, Kiev is the holy city of the Russian Orthodox Church. Kievan Rus was the capital of the Russian state. The Russian state was formed as a reaction to Mongol and other invasions of the Rus people. And Belarus, by the way, Russia, Rus means fair, and Belarus means very fair. So India is not the only country where that kind of a complexion is, in my view, very illogically regarded as an attribute, other than just another attribute. I think it's very important that all of us understand that, there's no such absurd superficial attribute so far as these things are concerned. But Kievan Rus was where the Russian people converted to the Christianity, if I'm remembering correctly. It was Emperor Vladimir who basically declared that everyone in Rus, in my kingdom, my empire of Rus, will now, as of this date, become Christian. And the Christianity is the Christianity, of course, the Russian Orthodox Church. It's a very, very influential and powerful church. I've been to some of their services. They're very, very impressive services. May I say that I've been to some Catholic services, and I've been deeply, deeply moved by those services. I've also been to masjids. I've been to gurdwaras, and I've covered in the sense, because ultimately you have to respect all faiths if you really respect your own faith. But having said that, Kiev is the Jerusalem of the Russian Orthodox Church. And why is it that NATO wants to take over Ukraine? It's not only kinetic, it's also spiritual. If you take over the Jerusalem of, let us say, which is the Jerusalem of the Jewish community, you are taking over the spiritual heart of the Russian Orthodox Church, and you are technically, if you're dealing with net assessment theories of various kinds, and I know because I've discussed so many of these kind of scenarios that look imaginary now, but which are practical if X, Y, Z gets accomplished. And if you do that, believe me, it's a very powerful soft power increase. It's a path right into the Russian Orthodox Church, which believes Kiev to be its spiritual capital, and Ukraine to be a country which is the home country of the spiritual capital of the Russian Orthodox Church. So these are just two of the very many reasons why you have President Putin order this kinetic invasion of Ukraine. I don't know what the reasons are that made some countries, go in for this revolution and throw out Yanukovych and bring in virulently Russophobic people. I would not like to take too much of time because you have little time, and unfortunately or fortunately, I mean, so have I. But I'd like to point out that that the importance of Ukraine, the spiritual importance of Kiev, is extremely crucial to the Russian Orthodox Church. I'd like to point out that Vladimir Putin has been a Christian from the first day of his life. His mother baptized him into the Russian Orthodox Church when he was a few months old, if I understand. He has been wearing a cross ever since his childhood. He didn't remove that cross even when he was in the, Komitot Gosodas Bezopasnosti KGB or whatever it's called. He didn't remove it even then, and everybody knew this chap is a Christian. That's the kind of person he is. For him, it's not just a war to protect Russia, physical Russia. It's a spiritual war. It's a holy war. And as all of us know, I mean, if you travel to different countries where holy wars have been fought, whether it's by armies of one religion or the other, the motivation is extremely strong in these wars, much more than in wars in which the spiritual component is lacking. In the case of Ukraine, there's a very strong spiritual component. And that is why I very much doubt that there will be any stop to this until Ukraine is presents itself in the same way as Belarusia. You'll remember that when there was an effort to topple the Kazakhstan government, which was seen as too pro-Russia. Incidentally, my information is that China also helped the Western world in trying to create a new government in Kazakhstan. That's why some of my comments are public, and many of them are in the Sunday Guardian. And I said very clearly, this is a Sino, the Chinese were active in trying to knock out Kazakhstan. And this is one of the many points in which Chinese strategic interests diverge from Russian strategic interests. Another good reason why we need to keep our contact with Russia. I've not been a fan of S-400, but I was assured by the government, by senior people of the government, that I was completely wrong, and I based my views on briefings by very top people in the United States, in Washington, that sanctions would be mandatory and could not be avoided. They either misled me or they were not aware of the facts. But I was assured that, please understand that now with this new Indo-Pacific strategy, India is just too important for the United States to sanction. Well, frankly, those in the government who warned me against going off on a crusade against the S-400 were right. And I was completely wrong on that. I hope I've not been wrong too many times. I'm sure each time I'm wrong, you have people who are students and now who are my colleagues like Anand, who may be, looking for that very carefully. I have to be therefore very careful. But this was the time when I was completely wrong. There were absolutely no sanctions at all to speak of, not even cosmetic. And which is why we continue to buy oil from Russia, there will be no sanctions. We continue to sell pharmaceutical Russia, there will be no sanctions. India is absolutely crucial in a free, open Indo-Pacific. And one of the reasons why Imran Khan went to Moscow was not in the begging bowl. His begging bowl he had kept in Beijing. It was to ensure that the optics were created so that people in India or the government in India would regard Russia as too close to Pakistan, and therefore that impression has been sought to be created very assiduously, if I may say so, including by some misguided people in our country. And we would then vote on the right side of history, where the UNSC was concerned. We did vote on the right side of history. I'm proud of my Prime Minister Narendra Modi for having got it right. on having got it right on the S-400 sanctions, having got it right on Ukraine. And, but the Chinese have been looking for every opportunity to basically distance us from Russia. I appeared on CGTN on a program which involved Russia, and there was an effort to basically try and put me in an anti-Russian direction. That failed. I'm now going to be on a dialogue program in CGTN, and I would like to say, to the credit of the Chinese Communist Party, that my remarks are carried in CGTN as is, where is, live without anything. I mentioned on CGTN my previous comments a few weeks ago that, look, we are very grateful to Russia, because when we had problems on our northern borders, I didn't, of course, specify the country, but it's obvious, Russia helped us massively during that time. Every week we used to get supplies from Russia of equipment that we needed to ensure our defense in this war. And we are not going to betray a friend in need like that. Well, I must tell you, to the credit of CGTN, they carried that live, and they got it in on social media also. There was no effort to censor it. I made another comment. This time, I think the question was about the United States. And I made it very plain that, at least, in our case, our quarrel is not with the mistakes made by Joe Biden or Blinken or whatever, but it's certainly not with the American people. And I declared very clearly, I love the American people. I love the United States. And I said what I said last time also. It's a security partner of India, and India and the United States are close security partners, which is why we certainly hope, that they will listen to the right advice. And we really can't understand why they are doing this to the world's preeminent, deadliest nuclear weapons power. We can't understand this. We can't understand the logic. And we hope they will begin to understand before it's too late for us. So I don't want to go into what I believe would be a prospective scenario if this war drags on for another month. You can see it in this Sunday in my in my item, in my column in the Sunday Guardian. But it's not heading in a good direction, I can tell you, a good direction for any of us. So I just want to end by saying, please look into all the aspects of the situation vis-a-vis Russia, NATO, and Ukraine. We can understand why NATO wants to grab Ukraine. We can also understand why Putin has to protect Ukraine from falling into the NATO sphere of influence. The way Zelensky, if you're having a false flag operation, who's the gainer from that? It's certainly not the United States or NATO. The last thing NATO wants is a kinetic conflict with Russia. They know Russia very well. Their military planners know Russia very well. They know the Russian nuclear arsenal very well. The last thing Russia wants is a kinetic conflict. Is with NATO over anything to do in Ukraine. The only gainers will be those individuals who are constantly badgering and begging, then badgering, then begging NATO to intervene militarily in Ukraine. I'm not going to mention who those people are, because they are people who are in real distress. They are leaders who even now don't seem to realize the catastrophe into which they have led their own people. But I'm not going to mention them because I feel terribly sorry for them. But I just want to say, it would not be Russia. It would not be the NATO that launches a false flag operation. It would be the only people who believe they can gain by this, by finally getting NATO into the war, something they wanted all along. I leave you to ponder which particular group of people and country I mean by that. We are entering an extremely unpleasant stage of world history unless NATO understands the limits of its power and acts in a manner that protects the security of all of Europe, the whole of continental Europe, not just half of Europe at the expense of the other half. That kind of thing is not security. Pakistan thought it can protect, I mean, the Pakistan military, it can protect the security of its 1/3 or whatever of the land area by imperiling the other 2/3. Pakistan is now falling apart as a consequence of that, falling apart. And sometime in the future, I'll try and see if I can persuade some of those who are fighting, for, if I may say so, democracy in Pakistan, in some of the Punjabi territories, in Pashtun territories, in Baloch territories, Pashtuns in particular. Many of them are now extremely upset about Pakistan. And I said from day one of the Taliban takeover, there are 6 factions of the Taliban. 2 of them under the pocket of the ISI, 1 in the pocketbook of China, and 3 free Taliban who are in nobody's pocketbook, and that are the younger Pashtuns, and they're getting increasingly angry with the Pakistan military, and that is an important development. But unfortunately, it does not stop them from being the oppressive kind of government that they are, and I don't believe Taliban rule is in any way good for Afghanistan, nor is it any way good for the world or for India. Having said that, Ravi, allow me to exit after about 5 or 10 minutes, if you don't mind, because I have 2 or 3 other urgent things to attend to. This has been the most urgent, and I do. But what I can say, if there are any questions now from some of our students, I'd be happy to answer them before I sign off. Thank you very much. I can't hear you, Anand.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for your lecture. It was very insightful. A lot of very important points which you have, brought together in a very cogent way and made a very, very powerful argument on this emerging scenario. At this instance, since Professor Nalapat is running short of time, can you just, I can just open the floor for Q&A, very few questions. Students, any questions? Yes, Srikotan, you can come here and ask the question.
Hello, sir. Thank you for the lecture. It was very insightful. So I'll get straight to the system. So firstly, something that we have been hearing since the beginning of the conflict is Putin's neo-Nazi rhetoric, whereby he called Zelensky as pro-Nazi and all. So by banning many of these opposition parties in Ukraine, has Zelensky justified Putin's claims? So that's my first question. Secondly, I'd like to know your opinion when you yourself criticized US. So my question is that has US foreign policy kind of lost sense of direction under Joe Biden? And thirdly, in your opinion, what is the writing on the wall of China with respect to Taiwan? Thank you.
Look, on the first point, please understand what President Putin means by denazification. When you discuss words and statements, you have to get in the mind of the other party. There's no point understanding denazification from the perspective of a Western scholar. It essentially means the ghastly, intolerable, barbaric persecution of the Jewish community by this animal Adolf Hitler. There was only one Holocaust, and that was the Holocaust unleashed by Hitler. There has not been any other Holocaust, and I do not believe we should refer to any other genocide as a Holocaust. That is solely the Hitlerian Holocaust against the Jewish community. What Putin means are Russophobic individuals, not Jew-phobic individuals so much. They are also Jew-phobic, by the way, many of them, but Russophobic. So that is the meaning of neo-Nazi. He wants to cleanse Ukraine of the Russophobic elements who are being trained, financed by NATO. I've seen this in Syria. The kind of people I met in Syria coming in through the Middle East. I mean, I realized these people are actually ISIS and Al-Qaeda people who have joined temporarily as freedom fighters, collect weapons, collect cash, and go back to ISIS and Al-Qaeda and to their sleeper cells. So these are the kind of people who have been empowered. So he doesn't mean the Jewish people who because Zelensky doesn't get it. I tweeted once that please, Zelensky, you may be forced to sign a peace treaty with Russia. Don't sign it. Let the military commanders, especially these Russophobic military commanders in your military, sign it so that the whole country knows who surrendered. Otherwise, what happened in Germany in 1919 will happen to Ukraine in 2022, which is that the Jewish community will be blamed for a surrender that was caused by Ludendorff and Hindenburg, the German army, which was comprehensively defeated in the First World War, which was bled to death. The army said, oh, we were stabbed in the back. And guess who picked up that slogan? A corporal in the army called Adolf Hitler. Some Ukrainian Adolf Hitler, Russia does not get more influence over Ukraine if the Russophobic elements are not dealt with in the manner they should be dealt with, which I think should be reformed rather than anything else. Well, you might get that kind of thing because the first thing they will do after Zelensky and other people in this government, many of whom are Jewish, will sign that document. Oh, the Jews sold us out. We were going to defeat the Russians. In fact, we were going to enter Moscow, but Zelensky stopped us from entering Moscow. So that is what's going to happen. So I told that Zelensky should not sign that. The military commanders of Ukraine should sign that because in hindsight, it's clear. Ludendorff and Hindenburg ought to have signed that surrender document rather than hide behind the pinstripe suit of the German delegation which signed this document. So far the US is concerned, look, I mean, let me be honest with you. I have no role in government. I have no contact with government. I don't know any. I mean, frankly, I can't say I know anybody in government who, I mean, in a serious manner. But I do get information here and there, matches of it. And the Americans have been supplying us pretty good systems, defensive systems, including during the recent problems with China. I don't think those systems have reduced as a consequence of our stand on Ukraine. I think Joe Biden is smart, and you know, Jake Sullivan is smart enough to understand the centrality of India in protecting the Indo-Pacific from hegemony. India has been against unilateralism from the very beginning. We were against US unilateralism, and tomorrow, if China attempts unilateralism and hegemony, we'll oppose that as well, as we are opposing it now. And for that, the US cannot do it alone. It needs India. So, frankly, if there was a scaling down of the assistance that the US is giving us in intelligence, in our defensive capabilities, I would be unhappy with that. But I'm not at all unhappy with that. I don't think anybody in the government will be unhappy with that. I hope not, at least, because of my information. So the Americans are standing by India. The Russians stood by India very much so, during the precise time of our conflict. That's what I call a friend in need. And my point has always been, work out a deal with Russia. If there's any war involving Russia and any other power, India should be neutral. If there's any war involving India and any other power, Russia should be neutral. I think we have kept our part of the deal, and as and when a war comes involving India, I am quite certain that President Putin will keep his side of the deal, looking at the help he has given us in facing our recent problems on the border. So I'm sorry, but I don't have, I have limited time. These are the two. Your other question is very good, but I really don't have time now. Otherwise, I'll stop about one more question.
Thank you, sir. We understand you have a busy schedule now. But I would like to thank you for coming and addressing our students on a very important geopolitical issue right now. And we all stand actually much enlightened than we were 1 hour ago. So I thank you immensely for that. I also would like to thank Dr. Ravi for giving the leadership to hold this seminar and encouraging the students to do this student seminar. In fact, we have around 35 of our students who will be presenting themes in the next in today and tomorrow. So I all the best for the students, and big thanks to you also for involving in this. And finally, I would like to thank the audience, including the students and some of the faculty from MAHE, the MAHE institution itself, who has come to join us. So thank you all. Have a nice day. And thank you once again.
Anand, I just want to say that I'd be grateful if you, filter through those presentations and give me some of them. Some in conversation, and others when I'm present on your campus, which I hope will take place in time. Thank you very much. It's been a privilege for me to address our students. Many of them are doing outstandingly. I'm certain this batch will as well. Thank you. God bless you.